Hi, my name's Ben, and I think that you should vote against Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Now, I would really prefer that you vote for Joe Biden instead, but at very least, I really don't want you voting for Trump. I thought I should explain why. Most of the reasons that I'm going to give for voting against Trump are going to be negative. Either Trump does this thing and it is bad, or Trump does not do this other thing and that is bad. This is not going to be exhaustive. I'm trying to keep this video as short as possible. Instead, I'm going to be providing some sources in the description that back up what I'm saying so that you can look into these matters for yourself. So I want to start by addressing what are probably the top two reasons that people give for supporting Trump: abortion and the economy. I am pro-life. But that being said, I strongly believe that single issue voting is wrong. So for those of you who don't know, single issue voting is when there is a particular political issue, and depending on which way a candidate leans on that issue, you vote for the candidate who supports your view, right? No matter what, regardless of their views on other issues, it's just that issue is the make or break. And really, as I'm going to show in this video, the negatives to voting for Trump outweigh this positive of dealing with the pro-life issue. The easiest way for me to address this is by actually addressing Biden's stance on abortion first. Now, it is true that he has said that he would like to repeal the Hyde Amendment. He's also said that he would make Roe v. Wade the law of the land if Judge Barrett is confirmed. That's true. People are freaking out about that, and I think it's an overreaction for two reasons. First of all, the president is the chief executive. He or she does not have the power to make laws. They have the power to sign laws into effect. That's true. But that's Congress's job to pass laws. Secondly, even if a bill codifying Roe v. Wade gets through the whole legislative process, what difference is that going to make? Based on our current system, abortion is legal in the United States right now, to some extent, in basically every state. Also, there would undoubtedly be legal challenges to that codification. A third thing to keep in mind is that if the Biden White House and the Democrats, if they tried to repeal the Hyde Amendment, there would be serious legal challenges to that. We've seen greater reductions in the abortion rate in this country under Democratic administrations. Part of the reason for that is because those administrations, generally speaking, increase healthcare access, including access to contraceptives. And if we're being realistic, the best way to reduce the number of abortions is to increase access to contraception. We also need better support systems for these mothers and for these children. However, those systems are often classified as socialist by Republicans. Part of the reason why women get abortions is because they feel like they are not able to support a child, or that it's going to derail their career or something like that. If we increased access to cheaper daycare or more affordable healthcare in this country, that would definitely help lower the abortion rate. Trump has nominated several pro-life judges. They're not quite as pro-life as you would think. For example, Brett Kavanaugh did not sign on to a dissent in an abortion case in which other justices signaled their disapproval of Roe v. Wade. So really, it's important to kind of ask yourself, okay, which is going to actually reduce the number of abortions and do it safely? Getting rid of the incentives to get abortions and providing the social safety net to help prevent these things, or making it illegal by fiat, basically, and leaving these women to have to go get them in unsafe environments. Don't get me wrong, I want to see abortion ended, period. But we have to do it safely, and we have to do it in a moral and compassionate way. And actually supporting these mothers and being more than just pro-birth, but actually pro-life, pro-whole life, I think is a much better way to do that. Also, it looks a little bit hypocritical when we as pro-life Christians or pro-life anyone says, hey, you really gotta, we shouldn't be aborting these babies, but then are supporting an administration that separates families or doesn't properly address the COVID crisis. Secondly, there's the economy. So first of all, it's really important to establish that the President of the United States really does not have a whole lot of power over the economy. a lot of the progress that has come under the Trump administration has really just been a continuation of what was going on under the Obama administration. So for example, President Trump likes to say, "I've built the greatest American economy ever." But do you know when the last greatest American economy was? Under President Obama. Do you know why that is? It's because the American economy has been growing at a steady rate for decades. What Trump did was not a substantial increase. In fact, the growth rate of our GDP has not substantially changed during the Trump administration. And it's unlikely to change in a substantial way under a Biden administration. Additionally, our trade deficit has actually gotten worse under Trump than it got under Obama. And this was one of Trump's main points when he was campaigning for election in 2016. We need to fix the trade deficit with China and with other countries. It's gotten worse. And I'm not just talking about COVID. Pre-COVID, the American trade deficit was worse on average than it was under Obama. Now, it is true that median household income and employment increased under the Trump administration, and that's great. But again, how much of that can you really attribute to a president? Some of it. I think Trump has had more influence over the economy than most presidents before him. That's fair. But that's not to say that he's entirely responsible for it. And also, that means he has to accept responsibility when things are not going well, like with COVID, which, by the way, there's a lot he could have done to deal with the COVID crisis that he didn't do. He could have instituted a national shutdown as a fire break, which was the theory that everyone was supposed to be operating on, but he didn't do that. He instead left it up to the states and let them do this piecemeal thing, and it didn't work. And he knew very early on, as he admitted to Bob Woodward on tape, he knew very early on that this was going to be a dangerous virus. So when people say, "Oh, well, the economy is great until COVID," and "Oh, it's the China virus" or something like that, stop it. Trump knew. Trump could have saved thousands of lives, tens of thousands of lives, I would bet, if he had just worn a mask, because people listen to what he has to say because he's the president. So really, even with those increases in median household income and employment, that doesn't necessarily justify all of the negatives. And that's not necessarily just going to go away or completely collapse under a Biden administration. After all, Biden was part of the Obama administration, which pulled us out of a pretty massive recession. Even if the economy was doing as much better than it had been previously because of Trump, that still wouldn't justify voting for Trump. There was a saying in post-World War II Italy that Mussolini made the trains run on time. Now, am I comparing Trump to Mussolini? Yes, actually I am. So now we're getting into my negative arguments, basically why you should not vote for Trump. So the first one is Trump's a fascist. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, this is just another crazy person on the left, Trump derangement syndrome. No, that's not this. I resisted saying that Trump was a fascist until June of 2020. That's a long time to wait. I wanted to be cautious about using that term. I was cautious about using that term. And I've checked Trump against several definitions of fascism provided by historians and other scholars of that issue. And he doesn't really come out looking great against any of them. But I really like this one definition of fascism from Robert Paxton. Paxton says, "Fascism may be defined as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion." I'll touch on each point of Paxton's definition briefly here. Fascists, or Trump, are obsessed with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood. Okay, so this is all over Trump's rhetoric. It's implicit in MAGA. We aren't great anymore because we declined, because of Obama, etc. He appeals to working class whites in this way, while effectively ignoring non-white people's problems. Compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity. This is the MAGA brand. Trump believes not in American unification, but in party unity, decrying those Republicans who would dare oppose him. He explicitly says that he's high energy as opposed to sleepy Joe Biden, and touts unprecedented economic growth, as he puts it, and his removal of important government constraints on corporations as a way to build a better America. There's no such thing as a patriotic Democrat in his mind, never mind a never-Trumper. He speaks of the silent majority in the way that Nixon did, and singles out his supporters as being better than others. He also has a very exclusionary idea of who should be an American, as seen in his immigration policies and his assertion that American-born Democrats like AOC should just go home, ostensibly to another country. A mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective cooperation with traditional elites. This is clearly seen in the marriage of Trump's populism to the subservience of traditional Republican politicians, who have almost entirely kowtowed to him and the wishes of his supporters, abandons democratic liberties. The concerns over voter suppression and Trump's failure to adequately address Russian election interference is pretty undemocratic. His refusal in 2016 and again this year to commit to conceding or handing over power if he loses is the definition of being anti-democratic. He also works to undermine voter confidence in the election system because he wants to be able to challenge the results if they don't go his way. But I guarantee you, he will not be asking for a recount if he wins. If he actually cared about making sure the election was not rigged, he would be proposing solutions, pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraint. This is especially important. Right-wing extremism has increased drastically in the United States during the Trump administration. He's repeatedly written it off and has even shared extremist content by promoting QAnon conspiracy theories. He even explicitly called to liberate states like Michigan and Virginia from their Democratic governors. In Michigan, armed right-wing militias stormed the Capitol building and earlier this month were arrested for plotting to kidnap and potentially execute the governor. His rhetoric of the news media as the enemy of the people has resulted in at least one attack on journalistic institutions. A lot of right-wing extremists in the past few years have used explicitly Trump-like language against immigrants and others in their manifestos. He's also employed state or government violence against American citizens, as seen in the way that he handled protests in Portland, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere. I mean, think about it. He had peaceful protesters gassed and beaten to clear the way for a photo op in June. But his regular use of dehumanizing language, so for example, talking about animals and thugs and describing cities as infested in reference to people of color, Muslims, Latino people, and liberals, is a classic example of that sort of internal cleansing type thinking. As far as external expansion goes, that part really doesn't apply to him, but he did float the possibility of buying Greenland. One doesn't need all of these traits to be a fascist, but when one has one or most of them, the way that Trump does, that means that one is definitely a fascist. Speaking of fascism, we might as well talk about his immigration policy. The Trump administration intentionally used family separation policy as a deterrent against people trying to migrate here from other countries. And it really actually doesn't matter if they were doing it illegally, because we have treaties with Mexico that state that we will not take punitive action like that. Oh, additionally, we've engaged under the Trump administration in something known as the forcible transfer of children, which if you look it up, that is a punishable act of genocide. But that's not surprising, considering that Trump's top immigration official has been exposed as a virulent white nationalist. Even recently, a story came out that over 500 children who were separated from their parents because of the current administration's policies, we can't find their parents. We don't know where their parents are. Think about that. A lot of you are parents. You try to bring your child to this country for a better life, and instead you end up losing them. You don't know where they are, they don't know where you are, and you might never see them again. Put yourself in their shoes for a minute. But yeah, this administration's pro-life. Yeah, that makes sense. So what about the stability of our country? What is the state of our union right now? The state of our union is weak, and it's because of Trump. We have not been at this point in this country since the 1960s. It could be worse than that by some metrics. I've already touched on this earlier a little bit, but the rise of right-wing extremism in this country during the Trump administration has been borne out by study after study after study. Now, it is also true that left-wing extremism has increased. However, it is not nearly as prominent as right-wing extremism. That's just a fact. In terms of the number of people killed, the number of plots, the number of attacks, it's not even close. Trump's been ignoring it for a while. He doesn't listen to those types of intelligence briefings. His administration had promised that they were going to do something to address right-wing extremism last year, and they haven't done it. In some cases, like I outlined earlier with Michigan and Virginia and things like that, he has even encouraged or incited that sort of violence. I mean, just look at what he said in that first debate where he said, stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys. They ate that up. Go look at the evidence from the Telegram channels. He also refuses to disavow QAnon. And the reason why he does it is because he knows that a lot of people who follow it support him. He only cares about himself. Let's be clear about that. Now, some people say, oh, well, why does he have to keep disavowing white supremacist groups and right-wing extremism? He's already done it. Or they'll say, oh, why does Joe Biden not have to do that with Antifa? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, Trump keeps consistently saying things that right-wing extremists love. Secondly, Antifa hates Biden. Biden, he's a liberal. He's not a leftist. And he has actually condemned that sort of violence quite explicitly on numerous occasions. So it's really not the same thing. Antifa is not the flip side of right-wing extremism. There is far more violence by right-wing extremists and white nationalists and folks like that than there are from folks on the left. That's borne out in every single serious terrorism study that I have seen. Between his casual attitude towards right-wing extremists and his constantly questioning whether the election is going to be legitimate or not, and he's calling for a Trump army to poll watch, which, by the way, has already led to a couple different cases of what looks a heck of a lot like voter suppression and voter intimidation. Trump is destabilizing the country. And frankly, I will be shocked, pleasantly surprised, but shocked if people do not die on and around Election Day, regardless of the outcome. Because I think that extreme Trump supporters and people who are looking to take advantage of an already chaotic situation are going to latch onto this. And I think that Trump is responsible for it. Why? Because he keeps on casting doubt on it. On Wednesday night, the head of the FBI and the director of national intelligence, they came out and they said, hey, listen, Russia and Iran are using these voter intimidation and vote suppression tactics, and they're trying to sow chaos and by making you question the whether the system is resilient enough and whether your vote is actually being counted. But those are the same exact tactics that Trump is using. So maybe it's time to think about whether he actually cares about getting the vote right and making sure that your vote actually counts, or whether maybe he doesn't care about that at all and he's much more concerned with things like winning and retaining power, which, by the way, is a threat to democracy. And he's repeatedly glorified violence by police officers and others against what he perceives to be his political foes. And additionally, his refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power is absolutely insane. By the way, you don't see any of this sort of behavior from Joe Biden. Not even close. Nothing like it. But you see it with Trump. And everyone's like, oh, well, it's just his personality. Well, if it's his personality, then his personality is not suited to hold office. It's that simple. These are norms. Not even the most aggressive and fascistic leaders in American history, like Richard Nixon, engaged in that sort of thing. It would have been unconscionable. And yet Trump has, because he doesn't have a conscience. And by the way, the whole left-wing extremist thing, that's a reaction to right-wing extremism. And yet it's not an equal and opposite reaction. It's a much lesser reaction. But I expect that if Trump gets reelected, that's going to basically give right-wing extremists carte blanche to do whatever the heck they want. And that's going to result in more violence from the right. And then the left is going to react. And then we're going to have a real problem on our hands. Whereas you see Biden addressing those issues. After all, it was the Obama administration that first said that Antifa was engaging in domestic terrorist violence back in 2016. So let's not fool ourselves here. Let's not think that, oh, Joe Biden is with Antifa. He's not at all. So now you're probably saying, okay, so I get the point. You don't want me to vote for Trump. So why should we vote for Biden? Frankly, because Biden would be something of a return to normalcy. His policies are not these far left things that people are making it out to be. Some of them are more progressive than they would have been a few years ago when he was vice president. That's definitely true. However, he is a far calmer and far more rational and respectful and compassionate individual than the current president. I could do a whole video on Biden, on why I think he's a much better presidential candidate, But frankly, the main thing is he is not Trump, and he is nothing like Trump. He is not nearly as radical. He is not the polar opposite of Trump from the standpoint of, like radical left. Even Bernie Sanders is not the polar opposite of Trump, because Bernie Sanders knows how to control himself. Donald Trump does not. So while Biden isn't a panacea that's going to make everything better and all the way back to normal, he could make things a lot better than they currently are. He could help restabilize us. We are not safer or better off or more unified with Trump as president. We are far worse off by every metric. Vice President Biden is not perfect, and I'm the first to admit that. And I will also be extremely critical of him if and when he comes into office. But he's a far better person, and he is a far more stable person than our current president. He will not work to divide the way that our current president does. It's always us and them. It's always this Manichaean black and white struggle with Trump. That's not really the case with Biden. I think that you should think about that. Those of us who are Christians should ask ourselves, does my support for a particular candidate reflect my love of others the way that Christ loved them? And all Americans should ask, does the candidate I support actually have what it takes to be in office? Are they going to bring Americans together? Are they going to bring peace and stability, or are they going to sow discord and create more division? Are they going to seek the interests of all Americans or just a select few? Now, these are difficult questions for all of us, but I think that we should take them seriously. I hope this video has helped you to think a little bit differently about who you're supporting this election cycle. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.